Since we don't have all the committee members, I am going to wait on the bill request until after the hearing. We're going to go ahead and get started with the hearing on 2036. Committee, I'll ask Amelia to give us a brief overview.
Happens every time. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill number 2036, as amended by the House Committee of the Whole, would provide a property tax exemption for homestead property of certain disabled veterans. The bill would provide a property tax exemption for all homestead property owned and actually and regularly occupied and used predominantly as a residence by a disabled veteran or any surviving spouse thereof, commencing in tax year 2024, to the following extent. So there are percentages of exemption for the first four categories. There's a 60% exemption of the assessed value for a disabled veteran who has a disability rating of at least 30%, but less than 40% from a service-connected disability. You'll see then the memorandum that I've handed out, and you can see it in the House bill as well. There is a 70% exemption, 80% exemption, 90% exemption, depending on the disability rating. Then there is a full exemption for a disabled veteran who is permanently confined to a wheelchair or who has a disability rating of at least 70% from a service-connected disability, and a full exemption for a disabled veteran who is 65 years of age or older. There is also a provision that a surviving spouse of a qualified individual would also be entitled to continue the exemption until such surviving spouse remarries. For purposes of this exemption, there is a definition of disabled veteran, which means a former member of the Armed Forces of the United States or the Air or Army National Guard of any state who left service with an honorable discharge or a date of medical discharge and has received a disability rating for a service-connected disability from the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Also, there's a provision that any homestead granted an exemption under this provision would not qualify for a refund under the Homestead Property Tax Refund Act. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and for your information, the bill passed the House on March 29th, 2023, on a vote of 123 to 1. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee questions, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amelia, thanks for reviewing the bill. So I just had more of a technical question about this because I've been involved in putting together some property tax rebate things recently over the past 6 years. Anyway, my question, Amelia, is this. We had talked or had an overview the other day about basically constitutionality of various tax provisions and relates to valuation and whatnot. I'm not aware of us having a statute of where basically we're treating different classes of people differently with respect to the direct valuation of real property. Is that constitutional?
If I may, Senator, may I interject? Amelia gave us an overview the other day on constitutionality, and I don't know that she's comfortable such a blunt question because the court decides constitutionality, but that is an excellent question. Could you rephrase it?
No, I'll just withdraw.
Okay, Amelia, if you, no, I'm glad you brought the topic up, Senator. It does need to be addressed. And this committee realizes there are issues by singling groups out.
Madam Chair, if I may, I don't want to speak, as you said, directly to this, but as you did ask for maybe an example, And because the court will be, would be the entity that would decide whether a piece of legislation or a statute is constitutional or not. And that can be a very complex question, based on the particular statute, the arguments being made. I did provide a memorandum with some, general information in it. Not addressing this particular bill, but there was legislation, I'm trying to think of the exact year, if it was 2013, 2014, where the legislature did amend a statute that had to do with the valuation of property, valuation of any property, in fact, after an appeal before the board or any court, that if the value of the property was reduced in that for a particular tax year, that value could not be increased in the following 2 years. And the court did address that. That was challenged. It was a very complex case. There was a specific definition, some specific definitions that had been amended. And in that particular case, this Kansas Supreme Court found that there would be, under that scenario, there would be some properties that were no longer valued at fair market value. And they did strike that particular provision of the statute as being unconstitutional.
Senator Holland.
So just to clarify, we don't have any case law on record specifically addressing the preferential tax treatment of certain classes of owners for the same real property class from that regard that you're aware of.
I would need to do more research. I'm not prepared to really talk about that today, but I am just off the top of my head aware of some older case law that has addressed exemptions in the past and classes and kind of making subclasses of property. And so there is some case law out there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator, do you have any other questions? Okay. Any other? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In this legislation, there are percentages of disability listed. Are there other places in statute that you can think of or that you know of where we list percentages of disabilities for veterans or for any other group?
The first thing that comes to mind is, I believe in the Homestead Property Tax Refund Act, I believe the definition of disabled veteran is if I'm recalling correctly, 50% or greater disability, I believe. But, and just to expand a little bit, Madam Chair, the Homestead Property Tax Refund Act has kind of been the traditional method by which some relief has been provided to certain persons or individuals outside of the valuation and assessment process, so that we kind of alleviate some of the possible concerns that have been, that are thought about here.
I do believe that you're correct. I believe it is 50%, but it's the same at 50% as it is 100%, whereas this is based off of percentage. So you don't know of anything such as this, and that's fine. I don't want to put you on the spot. I know you don't know every word of every statute. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
What we can do is research it and to confirm if there's any or not. I know Eddie's looking now, but Eddie, would you like to?
The only thing I was going to mention is that Amelia was correct. It's referred to, 50% is specified in the Homestead Refund Program.
And Senator Peck is correct. It's the same level for, yes, once you meet that threshold, it's a same treatment. Yes, that is correct. Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you help me understand a bigger picture when it comes to any types of exemptions? Obviously, we give exemptions to government, schools, churches. But can you help me or put a list together of everyone in the state of Kansas who by law is given an exemption today, or on top of your head? Or is the list small enough you can just shout it out?
Madam Chair, the list is not small enough that I can shout it out, but I'm getting an indication from Eddie. I believe there is a list of kind of that can be provided of the statutes and some general information about the different statutory exemptions.
Generally, for Kansas residential owners, the only people that would be exempt today are the people under the Homestead Act that have qualified for income, values of homes, and age.
So Amelia, please.
The Homestead Property Tax Refund Act is actually not
Sorry, yes.
an exemption.
Correct. Would argue that.
For those properties, for those homesteads. It is kind of run through the income tax code so that we alleviate the property tax concerns.
This is the constitutional loophole, is what I would call it. But, yes, that's the only program in the state that we have.
There may be, well, I'd have to look at go back and review our exemption statutes, but I think there probably are some exemption statutes that address residential property or some kinds of residential properties. But I would have to look.
Okay. So this is new charted territory, more or less.
I don't know all of our bill histories to know, how often, something, this particular topic has come up in this particular fashion as a property tax exemption.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amelia, I want to know, are there other states that have something similar in their statutes?
We might be able to do some research or work with research to get some information. From what I know, there are other states that have some type of relief or property tax exemptions for disabled veterans and seniors and possibly others. But I also know that some of those, there is constitutional authority in those states that provides the legislature either the authority or an instruction to exempt those properties. So we do not have that authority.
Thank you for clarification. Senator Holland. Okay. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Real quickly, I noticed in the fiscal information that the Kansas Association of Counties and League of Kansas Municipalities would not be able to give an amount that this would impact them. Is there a reason why? Was it timing? Is it the way that they calculated? Or will we be getting an estimate of that? Or
So that would not be a question for the revisor.
Okay.
We can check back with Eddie later and find out. He'll delve into that for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Amelia, I'm sorry. So committee, any other questions for Amelia? I will make the statement that the Homestead II Act is more a rebate program. Everybody pays their taxes, and then the state establishes a rebate system. And thankfully, Senator Holland brought that to my attention, asked if I was willing to help. I asked if he would add the disabled veterans to the program. And we were, with this committee's efforts, much effort, we were able to get that across the line and into law. So it was just a way of addressing the constitutionality that we could face with this legislation. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. We'll open up for our first conferee. I'd like to welcome all the veterans first to the committee and to the hearing, and it's heartfelt. I do thank you. The committee thanks you for all your service and sacrifices that you've made for our country. So thank you. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee, for taking the time to hear this bill. So the folks behind me are going to talk much more eloquently than I can about the sacrifices that disabled veterans make and why they're deserving of this exemption. So I'm not going to touch on that. What I'm going to touch on is why this is a good thing for Kansas and it's a good thing for your constituents. So Kansas is one of the top 5 states to move out of right now, and a lot of those folks that are moving out are disabled veterans. We separate hundreds, if not 1,000, disabled veterans every year from Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth, McConnell, and they're all going to other states. To answer the senator's question, 18 other states have similar property tax exemptions, and we're losing veterans to those states. Texas and Florida are the number 1 and 2 that they're going to, but they're going to all those 18 states because the tax environment's better. We had a gentleman who used to run the Veteran Service operation to get benefits for veterans for the VFW. He spoke before the Veterans Caucus last year. He said that every year they identify for these separating veterans $700 million in VA benefits, and then $500 million of them leave the state to go to other states. That's $500 million a year in benefits, and that's, compounding, because if those veterans are staying here every year and, more veterans identified that are leaving the state and going to other states. And that's why I have been fighting so hard for this legislation, because, Leavenworth is one of those towns that has a lot of veterans, and we're losing population in the city of Leavenworth. And so I'm trying to keep those veterans here to grow our state, grow our communities. So we passed this 123-1 last year, and then in the off season, in the interim, I heard from Leavenworth County and I heard from Geary County that they're very concerned about the cost to them of the bill, which is a valid concern. And so I went to work in the off season here. I had Kansas Legislative Research Division do the numbers based on how many veterans we have in each of these communities for every county in the state. It turns out that 102 counties would see 1.7% or less impact on their property tax revenues, and 85 counties would see less than 1% impact. All the veterans, most of the veterans, live in Riley County, Geary County, and Leavenworth County. And so I've shared an amendment by email with some of you that I've been working on the off season that I would give to you to deliberate on as you see fit. That would refund the exemption for those 3 counties, because those 3 counties are, the way the amendment's written, it says any county impacted over 3%, which is just those 3 counties, because every other one is 1.7% or less. The original fiscal note on this bill, when we weren't refunding that money, was going to be $9 million. That's the state property tax, the 20 mils plus 1.5 mils. Now, if we're able to pass the tax bill that the conference committee just worked on, that number would go down because of the increased exemption. But when we pass the bill, it's $9 million. If you in your wisdom decided to add that amendment, it would be another $22 million to those 3 counties for refunds. And the way it's written, it refunds to the counties and also any schools or municipalities in those counties that would be impacted more than 3%. I'll talk briefly. I'll give you my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but I'll give you my opinion on the constitutionality argument, and then I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time. The way the quality clause in the Constitution is written, it says that the legislature shall provide for a uniform and equal basis of valuation and rate taxation. The way that this bill is written, it's exempting from property or ad valorem taxes levied. So I would make the argument, if I were a lawyer arguing this before a court, which I'm not, that we are exempting the rate rather than changing the valuation or changing the rate of taxation. The county will go through that whole calculation the same as they would for any other person, and then on the back end, because these veterans have whatever percentage of disability, they'd be exempted on the back end. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, thanks for being here today. Just some initial questions. When you were putting together your bill, were you aware that the legislature had passed Senate substitute for HB 2239 in 2022?
I'll need a little more help, Senator.
Okay,
I'm
it
not
was
sure.
a bill specifically, it was one of now 3 property tax rebate programs that we have that specifically allows disabled veterans 50% or greater, given certain income and home valuation parameters, to actually get a rebate. Were you aware that was out there at the time?
I was, Senator. What I would say the distinction between this bill and that legislation is that rebate is only $700, which does not make us competitive with those 18 other states that are doing much larger. But then the other thing that I would say is if this committee chose to go a different route to expand the homestead exemption, the fiscal note for this goes way up if you're going to provide a comparative
Senator Holland.
number.
Yeah, Representative, no, you're referring to the wrong rebate program. So we've had 2 traditional rebate programs around for quite a while. We've had the homestead property tax rebate, then we've had a separate program called Save Seniors, okay? This body passed and enacted a law in 2022, something called, we need to get it a better name because but anyway, basically what it was.
Perhaps the golden years?
Yeah, there we go. Great idea, Madam Chair. But basically, so Representative, we passed a 3rd rebate, and it specifically addressed fixed income seniors, okay, as long as disabled veterans. And there were income and home valuation appreciation parameters. But the point is that in that program, there is no $700 cap, okay? The whole purpose of that rebate program was to, in fact, establish a de facto property tax freeze, where either the disabled vet or the senior is paying that every year, and it's going up and up, but the state is turning right around and then reimbursing, excuse me, Madam Chair, the delta to that taxpayer. So I was just curious to see if you had actually looked at that newer legislation before you introduced this.
Was that the one that was bundled into, I think it was SB 8 or 160, I can't remember, but we passed it and then it was vetoed by the governor?
No. This became law in 2022.
Okay.
It's out there.
Yeah, so this bill does not have income limits and does not have house value limits on it. What I would posit to you is that if we were to expand that program to match this program so that we're competitive with these 18 other states, you would find that the price tag would get much larger.
Senator Holland.
Okay. And I would just, I guess I would just ask you to look at what's already out there in 2239, because there's some difference in taxes structures from the standpoint of, we talk about basically the costs of your bill. We're basically talking about hits to, 20 middle school finance, some state property tax collections, okay? But in essence, you have a cost of your program of where, if I'm understanding your bill correctly, Eddie, correct me if I'm wrong or whatever, basically what your bill does is it directly shifts the tax burden to your non-disabled veteran neighbors in your locale. Whereas what the 2239 does, in essence, it keeps the level playing field, and the state is basically providing the benefit. So something you may want to talk about with folks on your policy, because your non-disabled vets locally are going to end up having increased property taxes to a certain extent. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that's how this works out if this is implemented versus what we have in 2020.
So Senator, thank you for that question. That was what I was talking about with the amendment. And I apologize if I didn't get you the amendment, I'll email it to you. But that was the concern that I heard from Leavenworth County and from Geary County. And if this body in its wisdom chooses to apply that amendment, it would not shift the tax burden to the non-disabled veterans, because the county would get a complete refund of all the money that they exempted because of this bill. So it would have zero impact on other taxpayers.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate your concern for the veterans. If you thought about this from a BRAC perspective, base realignment and closure, you know, when they came in the last time, that commission, they pulled minutes not only from the cities the bases were in, but from cities clear around them, looking for things that were against veterans. Now, if someone were to sue to try and do this, you believe that would be considered against veterans, or?
Sir, I think that I think that that is an incredibly valid concern. You know, Fort Leavenworth contributes $6 billion to the local economy. Fort Riley, $4 billion. I'm afraid I don't have the number for McConnell because they're Air Force, not his Army. But when the federal government is looking at what bases to keep and what bases to close, it's all a great big spreadsheet, right? And you've either got a red gumball or a green gumball based on how you treat veterans and how you treat service members. And this is a big red gumball for Kansas that we're not exempting our veterans from property tax like those 18 other states. So this would definitely make us more competitive. It's one way. It would make us more competitive in keeping our posts if there were another BRAC.
I like the fact that if it did pass and was found constitutional, it would make it. So my concern is if it were challenged on the constitutionality. I mean, I don't want us to lose any of our mission sets. We have great bases and great people running them, and big boost to our economy. Thank you.
And sir, you know, I'm not wedded to the exemption versus refund. The reason I wrote it as an exemption versus a refund is just because of the price tag. When you have every veteran in the state go back to the state for the dollars, it balloons the cost of the bill.
So thank you, Senator, for bringing that up. That's an issue that we hadn't considered, and a very important one. It could negatively impact. Senator Clays, did you have a comment? Okay. Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one clarification on your amendment. So the amendment would exempt in those 3 counties, the state would be paying the property tax for the disabled vets, whereas the other 102 counties, the neighbors would technically fill that void.
Yeah, it's less than 1% hit for 85 of those.
How many of our state's disabled veterans live in those 3 counties? Do you know?
I don't know the number. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I just have the percentage of the property tax, and I can tell you that if you'd like, but I don't know the number of veterans.
I was just thinking Sedgwick and Johnson County being the 2 largest counties. I'm just curious what the numbers were.
Yeah, and so
somebody in the audience will.
I actually, percentage-wise, Sedgwick, I was surprised because there's a lot of veterans there because of McConnell Air Force Base. It's only a 1.2, according to KLRD, it's only a 1.2% hit on the property tax revenues in Sedgwick County because there's so many other people that disabled veteran population's a smaller percentage.
I appreciate that. And I would bet, you know, myself included, but my neighbors, everybody would be willing to pay the share of the disabled veterans' property tax in our county. I'm just curious about the 3 counties where the state's paying it, but I understand the impact. Thank you.
And I think the other thing I'd say, and there's no way to quantify this, right? Because we don't know until we find out how many veterans are going to be persuaded by the bill to stay here. But there's a huge economic impact to those veterans. In addition to the $500 million that's leaving our state every year, there's the healthcare issue, right? Because the benefits that they get from the VA healthcare because they qualify for VA medical care, most of it is done on the local economy. It's not, they don't get their healthcare from the VA. They go, you know, I just had surgery on my hand. The VA sent me to KU Med, and then the VA paid KU Med. So it helps, you know, those veterans getting that great health care and their spouses who are probably in TRICARE getting that great health care. It's funding or subsidizing our local health care, not, you know, the VA hospital particularly.
Thank you. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Proctor, I really appreciate you bringing forth this legislation with the co-sponsors. Our disabled veterans are the only group that I think are entitled to anything from the rest of us taxpayers. So, and I think the rest of the committee agrees with that. I've proposed legislation and well known in our area for working with disabled vets. I do have a couple questions. I actually had more, but some of them have been asked. Sort of piggybacking on Senator Blasey's comment / question. If I understand your amendment right, if a county is at 3% or more, they're made whole, right?
Correct.
So some counties would not qualify, so they would not be made whole, and the rest of us would pay the difference. And I'm like Cinder Blazing, hey, count me in. But would it not make sense for, rather than those 3 counties to be made whole, for them to have a little skin in the game as well? Maybe if they're above 3%, they get up to 2% or something like that, or?
I will leave that to the wisdom of the committee. I just I tried to give a starting place for a discussion of how to compensate those counties. Geary County would lose something like 19% of their property tax revenue. Leavenworth and Riley, it was upwards of 6% of their property tax revenue. But again, I would leave that to the wisdom of the committee. I just tried to draft a starting point for discussion.
And the funds for this reimbursement would be a new fund established, or it would be from state general fund?
The amendment is drafted, creates a new fund that has to be funded. And one of the counties had a concern, well, what if you pull the rug out from under us, like LAVTR or whatever? We can talk about that. I don't want to wade into those shark-infested waters. Yes. I would say that I put into the amendment a non-severability clause. So if the state stops funding the fund, the exemption goes away so that the counties don't get left holding back.
I realize we're running very short on time, but I did have one quick question I think is very pertinent. The percentages. How'd you come up with those percentages? There's nothing else that we've been made aware of in staff.
Yeah, there's the Homestead Act, some of the license plate bills for disabled veterans, they use a 50% threshold. I went a little bit, dipped down a little bit lower because, I've discovered in legislation, you ask for the world, and if you get New Jersey, you're happy. So I figured I would put everything that if in a perfect world we would be able to do, and then the legislature in their wisdom would decide where the threshold should be.
Committee, any other questions? I have a couple on procedure. Representative, you threw this committee in harm's way, well, not literally harm's way, figuratively, with the implications last year that this committee was blocking this legislation. I would draw to everybody's attention, that is not accurate. That is not the process. This committee did not receive the legislation until session was over. We were not able to have a hearing on it last year. So I would ask respectfully that you understand the process before you put false information out.
Sarah, I'd like to make a public apology to you. Any implication that I may have made that you don't, and the committee, any implication that I may have made that you don't support veterans could not be further from the truth. I can't think of a senator that supports veterans more than you, and I think the fact that this was one of the first bills you took up proves that.
Is kind of you, but I would say that many of these committee members have been fighting for veterans. As I said, it was a team effort to get the Homestead II Act across the line. We do care about our veterans. We care about our first responders. We care about so many in the state. And thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, we are short on time. We get the room for 45 minutes. We will run a little bit over. What we'll probably do is go into another day to make sure that everyone's heard on this. We'll have to reschedule. I know weather has been an impact. There's been many issues. Let's try to get everybody in front of the committee that's from out of the area that traveled to be here today, if we could. So Troy Abel.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, thank you very much for, first of all, for hearing House Bill 2036 and for allowing me to testify today. I'll keep this brief. I served in the Kansas Air National Guard for 28 years from my enlistment in 1992 all the way through my retirement in December of 2020. You're going to hear a lot of folks talk about disabled veterans from a federal perspective. I would like to talk about it from a state and National Guard perspective. So most of you know the National Guard basically serves in two facets. Federally, we serve the Department of Defense when called upon to do so.
Sir, we're going to have to stick you to the bill to comment on the legislation. We are going to run out of time, and so.
Okay, yes, I'll condense and make it even more brief.
Thank you.
So I'm not going to speak to the federal piece of it because you're going to have all sorts of folks that are going to do that. But from a state perspective, recruiting and retention is utterly critical right now in the National Guard, nationwide and especially in Kansas. This bill is the right thing to do for those disabled veterans behind me and throughout the state. It proves that the state will do the right thing by those who are watching that are currently serving and those that are considering serving by letting them know that if they raise their right hand, and those that have already raised their right hand, that this state will do the right thing by them if they are injured in doing so. So not only is it taking care of those that have already been disabled, but it shows those that are serving and considering service that they will be taken care of. And that sends a huge message when you're trying to recruit and retain, which is vital for the strength of our Kansas National Guard. And that's basically the message I was wanting to send, Madam Secretary, or excuse me, Madam Chair. And with that, I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Too, and thank you for your message. Larry Hanneman? Sorry. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you, and members of the committee. I'm pleased that you give me the opportunity to express my opinions as a citizen of our great state. I hail from Wamego, Pottawatomie County, and I'm very proud of it. My service at Fort Riley moved me to the area. I am a veteran. I'm served over 30 years in the military. I am in support of this bill. I also still serve in various veteran service organizations, and I network with other veterans, and that's important for us. Now, my father served in the Korean War. In his generation, 11% of our citizens in the country had served in the military. Then we came to the Vietnam era, only 4%. Today, less than 1% of our citizens have taken an oath to serve this nation and or their state. Now, Kansas, as you know, hosts 3 major installations and 2 heavily used Air National Guard installations. And we have the payroll center for the Coast Guard right here in Topeka. As you know, many active duty service members claim several states. They can claim any state as their home of record. Those service members usually choose an address that is in a veteran-friendly state, as Representative Proctor had indicated. I'm sure you've noted the large amount of license plates when you're going up and down the interstate that are from Texas and from Florida. Well, those people are working here, but they claim those states as their home of record. And when they finish their service, as Representative Proctor said, they tend to move back to those states. I believe everyone in this room desires to keep these veterans within the borders of Kansas. They have their talents, their service, their resources, and the buying power that they bring with their pensions and their benefits. Now, remember, every federal dollar that comes into Kansas turns over at least 7 times within the state for our economy. Now, as you know, the life of a military member is extremely taxing, as well as on their families, and we put military members in some of the most terrible environs that are imaginable, and then they come home. They do this so that our citizens can rest peacefully at night. So I really appreciate your comments about these people behind me and the service that they've done. Without citizens to take on these military hardships, our lifestyles could be imperiled. Now, I am aware that there are county and city commissioners that are concerned.
Sir, I'm sorry, but we have 6 more proponents,
Okay, I will be very brief.
several opponents.
Thank you. I think if we look at their concerns, these county commissioners, city commissioners, I think that's more short-sighted. If we can keep these veterans in the state, we have a much more long-sighted view of what is good for the state of Kansas. I want to thank you. I'll summarize. I want to thank you very much for letting me testify today. It really means a lot to me as a citizen. I appreciate if you have any questions, I'd like to answer them.
We're glad to hear from you, and we do have your written testimony. Committee, any questions? Seeing none.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael Kelly, welcome back to the Tax Committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to be heard. Senators, thank you. In Kansas, we have about 45,000 service-connected disabled veterans. That means they were injured or became ill directly related to their military service. About 9,000 of those individuals are rated 100%, which means they're, in the federal government's estimate, their economic ability is reduced to zero. So it's about 9,000 people. In the fiscal note for this bill, Kathleen Smith and her staff estimated that 74.5% of disabled veterans own homes in Kansas. I'm very skeptical of that number because I have searched high and low, and I have not found anyone, Census Bureau, any kind of real estate organization that has the home ownership percentage for disabled veterans. There's lots of numbers on home ownership percentages for veterans, and the VA runs a very effective mortgage program that veterans take advantage of. So veterans altogether have a high ownership rate, home ownership rate, and are high property tax payers. But disabled veterans, I do not believe, are nearly that same rate. We have a national commitment to support our veterans. That's not just the federal government, that's the state government, which you represent, but our counties and cities, all the political subdivisions owe something to our veterans. There was a question about do different laws have percentages in them? KSA 8-161 is an example I found right away, which is a license plate bill. There was also a bill passed last year for hunting and fishing licenses at a low fee, and that, I believe, is a 30% cutoff. So Senator Peck, there are laws in Kansas that go by that. In other states, Illinois, and I don't have the law citation here, and ma'am, I'll provide it to the taxation email address after the meeting. Illinois grants different property tax, and I'll use the word exemptions, that may not be the legally correct term, but based on 30%, 40%, 50%. They have a similar construct. It's in Representative Proctor's bill, and that's been in force for about 10 years. Many, many states exempt property tax for 100% disabled veterans. Many states do. And that's the least we owe them. The last thing I would like to say, well, two more things. The Census Bureau has a website. You can plug in the county and ask how many disabled veterans reside in that county, and the Census Bureau will give you an estimate with a confidence interval on it. And I think the number for Leavenworth County, for example, is around 4,000 disabled veterans in Leavenworth County, which is the whole county of Leavenworth has about 10,000 veterans altogether. Finally, 2,500 years ago, Greece was under attack by Persians. Persian was an imperial monarchy. Their leader was considered a god. The Greeks believed in democratic principles. And we're still here today practicing democratic principles that came from the Greeks. The reason that Greece survived is that Spartans and Thespians and other members of the other Greek city-states stood in front of 100,000 or more Persians and fought to the death. Many of the people behind me have been all in. There's been lead flying. There's been mortars over their head. They've been in tough situations, lethal situations, and some of their buddies didn't come back. Warriors have defended democracy for 2,500 years. We'll defend it to the death in the future. Your support you expressed at the beginning of this meeting, it's great. Thank you. But there's more that can be done, and we ask you to support 2036. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm ready for any questions.
We don't have, well, if you have questions, then we're going to have to reschedule the rest of the conference. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be really brief. This is because of something you brought up, that Kansas veterans have a 74% home ownership. You said that disabled veterans is probably significantly lower. My question, and you may or may not want to answer it immediately, but if you had a choice between this legislation that exempts homeownership or property taxes for homeownership for some veterans versus other legislation we've got that exempts all disabled veterans from sales tax, would you choose one over the other?
I feel like I'm at a dissertation defense here. Sir, I know you put a bill in last year that exempts certain veterans from sales tax on certain purchases. And my organization, Military Officers Association of America, supported that bill. We support both bills. I'd have to look at the numbers on both and what the impact would be as far as our whole military community. And I can't make a choice right now. It's like, which of your children do you like the most? We would like lower tax burden on the military community. That would be our statement. Particular policy, if you said I had to just choose one, I'd have to do some quantitative analysis, and I'm not prepared to do that without seeing the text.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
We probably have time for one more conferee. Committee, we lose the room, and we have to be on the Senate floor at 10:30. So what I would like to do is reschedule so that you can continue to be heard. We will continue the hearing. I'll have to adjust the schedule for next week. We have a presentation scheduled for tomorrow, and that way you won't have to drive up 2 days in a row. We'll give you a little bit of breather, but there will be a notice on it. In fact, I'll figure that out as we're hearing testimony. So next up, Colonel Roth from Leavenworth. And Mr. Miller, if you wouldn't mind, you're from Topeka, so if you wouldn't mind, that'd be great. Thank you. Wouldn't mind what? Delaying your testimony until, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Colonel Retired Len Rolfe. I am 100% disabled. Served my country for 31 years active duty and 20 years as a government civilian. So my entire adult life, I will continue to fight for our veterans, their families, and what we do for our communities, for the veterans across the state. Our state does not, in my humble opinion, you've heard a lot of the comments so far. There's so many other states are doing so much more. So this is just a small step, and I urge you to support the bill. Thank you very much.
That was brief, briefer than I expected. I've heard him speak before, and I've never heard him be that brief. So thank you. Committee, Leonard Russell from Leavenworth. Is he here? Okay, he's not. Let's go ahead and try to get Dick Miller. Okay, that's fine. And if you'd rather wait until we reschedule, you're fine. Okay.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Dick Miller. I'm chairman of the Kansas Disabled Veterans Lobby. We're just a grassroots organization of veterans. And thank you very much, Senator Tyson. And tongue-in-cheek, Senator Holland, see what you've started? All right. Well, really, I understand in this bill, emergency responders and senior citizens are not, they're excluded from the bill. And it's not to say that they're not equally as deserving, but please do not categorize these groups within the same league as military disabled veterans. It's just apples to oranges. And yet this bill, I think, is going to be a monumental step in addressing future groups. And I know we've had some counties that have stepped forward and said this is going to kill them. And I think that Representative Proctor's amendment, I hope, will rectify that. We also heard lots of rumblings about the exemption and its lack of constitutionality. You know, if you took a look at your last 5,000 exemptions, I could attack every one of them for constitutionality. So I think that the reviser has actually dispelled this notion. I may be in error. But anyway, I believe the bill is bipartisan, and it's had legislative support, and it's finally going to step to the plate and not renew our old membership in the club of states that have ignored the sacrifices by their deserving disabled veterans. In summary, thank you very much, all of the senators and the representatives. I just ask now that you join with us and honor the sacrifices of our state's disabled veterans. I think it's a law that will certainly ease the pain of our forgotten and unintended consequences of war. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam
Will you
Chair.
please stand for a question?
Not a question, just a statement. Those of you that may not have caught it in the testimony, you included that last week a Leavenworth commissioner alleged that the disabled veteran's plight is, quote, overplayed, stating that a veteran can be rated 100% if he or she merely has sleep apnea. Thank you for including that. I can't think of anything more insulting to our veterans that serve us. Thank you for
I'm
including that.
Sorry you looked at it that way. I will say that.
No. I think it's insulting that a commissioner would make such a statement.
Oh, okay, all right. I thought I did.
My brother-in-law is a disabled veteran. My father served in the Army and the Navy and had a disability. Thank you for standing up for those that have served us so
I also
bravely.
had testimony from my brother, John Dunn, Colonel John Dunn, who was a POW in Vietnam for 5 years. And you just take a look at that gentleman who spent 5 years in a bamboo cage, had to dig his own grave inside that, and came back, and I'm trying to get him to come back to Kansas, and he says, Dick, I can't do it. It'll cost me $50,000. He's living in Florida now. So we got to have some sort of a bill that addresses this, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. We did have Michael Ogle left. What I'm going to do is continue the hearing on Tuesday, January 23rd. So we will hear from conferees, and on the 23rd. We do have other hearings scheduled that day, but I would say none as critical as this, so we will finish it up. Committee, so I'm going to leave the hearing open, and then, or I guess we close the hearing and then reopen it? Technically, this is unusual, so I'm trying to get lead so that we follow the proper rules. I think we'll go ahead and close the hearing and then reopen the hearing on the 23rd. So we'll close the hearing for now and then reopen it on January 23rd. Committee, we did have on the agenda a bill request. Very quickly, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, 2024 RS 2623, reducing the state rate of tax on sales of food and food ingredients to 0% on April 1st, 2024.
So Senator, why would we make that bill request when we're working that legislation on the floor today?
Madam Chair, I just asked to make a bill request. I'm just entering the bill into the record.
On food?
Yes, on this particular RS.
Just food only?
Yes.
Okay.
Food and food ingredients.
Any other questions? Senator Blasey.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the microphone. Some of it was working or was on, but you said this bill is only for food reduction?
Reducing the state rate of tax on sales of food and food ingredients to 0% on April 1st, 2024.
So that's fine, Senator. I hope you'll support the legislation this afternoon on the floor. Are there any other questions on this bill request? Seeing none, any objection? Seeing none, we'll make the request. Senator, we're out of time, but
real quick.
Senator Holland.
2024 RS 2446, increasing the extent of property tax exemption for residential pride from the statewide school levy, and a number of other things, Madam Chair.
Senator, we need the list of other things.
Decreasing the
we're out of
normal rate.
time.
Okay.
So
I'll withdraw it and make it later.
will you make it tomorrow?
Yeah.
Tomorrow's Thursday?
whatever
Okay.
we can do.
Okay. Committee, is there any other business to be brought before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you, committee, for your work.